One Gospel, version 3, part 15, Jesus' arrest and trial, taken from the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. When Jesus had spoken these things, he went out with his disciples, according to his custom, beyond the Kidron brook to the Mount of the Olives. His disciples also followed him. And then Jesus came with his disciples to the place which was named Gethsemane, where a garden was. He said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go away and pray over there. Pray that you do not enter into a trial." He took Peter and James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, with him, and began to be sorrowful, troubled, and deeply distressed. He said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful to death. Remain here and watch with me." He went forward a little, withdrawing from them about a stone's throw. And he knelt down, fell on his face on the ground, and prayed that if it were possible the hour might pass from him. He said, "My Abba Father, all things are possible to you. If it is possible, and you are willing, take this cup away from me. But not my will, but yours be done." He came to the disciples and found them sleeping. He said to Peter, "So, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you do not enter into a trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again the second time and prayed, speaking the same words, "My Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done." When he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. He left them and went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same word. And an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. His sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose up from the prayer and came to his disciples the third time, he found them sleeping from sorrow. He said to them, "Why do you sleep? Sleep the remainder and rest. It is enough. Look, the hour has come near. The Son of Man is being delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise and pray that you do not enter into a trial. Let us go. Look, he who is betraying me has come near." Jesus is arrested. Immediately, while he was still speaking, he who was called Judah, one of the 12, came from the chief priests and the Torah teachers. Judah, who betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. And Judah took with him a great multitude with swords and clubs, a band of troops and officers from the chief priests, elders of the people, and Pharisees. They came before them with torches, lamps, and weapons. He who betrayed him had given them a sign, saying, "Whoever I shall kiss, it is he. Seize him and lead him away safely." And when he came, he immediately drew near to Jesus to kiss him and said, "Rabbi, greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Judah, friend, why have you come? Do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am." And Judah, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Then as soon as he said to them, "I am," they drew back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I have said to you that I am. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go away." So that the word might be fulfilled that he said, "I have lost none of those who you gave to me." When those around him saw what was going to happen, they said to him, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" Then they came and laid their hands on Jesus and took hold on him. And then Simon Peter, one of those with Jesus who stood by, having a sword, stretched forth his hand, drew his sword, and struck a servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said, "Permit even this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to Peter, "Put back your sword into its sheath, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot now call on my Father, and he shall place beside me more than 12 legions of angels? Shall I not drink the cup that my Father has given to me? How then shall the sacred writings be fulfilled, that it must happen in this manner?" And in that hour Jesus said to the multitudes who came to him, the chief priests, captains of the temple, and elders, "Have you come out like against a thief, with swords and clubs to seize me? I sat with you daily, teaching in the temple, and you did not stretch forth your hands against me to seize me. But in order that the sacred writings may be fulfilled, this is your hour and the power of the darkness." Then the band, the captain, and officers of the Jews seized Jesus and bound him. And all this happened so that the sacred writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. And then all the disciples left him and fled. And a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth put around his naked body. The young men laid hold of him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. The trial before the high priest and Sanhedrin. And those who had laid hold of Jesus took him and led Jesus away. And they first brought him to the house of Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die for the people. And all the chief priests, the elders, and the Torah teachers were assembled with him. And Simon Peter followed Jesus at a distance, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known to the high priest, and he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then that other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the female doorkeeper and brought in Peter to the inside of the courtyard of the high priest. Then the servant girl doorkeeper said to Peter, "Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" He said, "I am not." And the slaves and servants, when they had kindled a fire of coals in the middle of the courtyard because it was cold, stood and sat down together, warming themselves. Peter went inside, stood and sat down with the servants, and warmed himself at the fire to see the end. The high priest then asked Jesus concerning his disciples and concerning his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I spoke freely to the world. I always taught in the synagogue and in the temple, where the Jews always come together. In secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Look, they know what I said." When he had said these things, one of the servants standing by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken evil, testify concerning the evil. But if well, why did you smite me?" Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. The chief priests, the elders, and all the Sanhedrin council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, and they found none. Though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. For many bore false testimony against him, but their testimonies were not alike. Later, 2 false witnesses arose, came forward, and bore false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I can and will destroy this temple of God made with hands, and by 3 days I will build another made without hands.' But neither in this manner was their testimony alike." And the high priest stood in the midst and asked Jesus, "Do you answer with nothing? What do these testify against you?" And Jesus kept silent and did not answer anything. After the high priest said to him, I demand an oath by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Messiah, the Son of the blessed God. Jesus said to him, I am. You have said it. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting by the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of the heaven. Then the high priest tore his garments and said, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him. They answered and said, He is deserving of death. And then some began to spit on his face and to cover his face and to beat him. And other servants struck him with the palms of their hands and said to him, Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who is he who struck you? And Simon Peter was outside, sitting down in the courtyard, standing and warming himself. One of the servant girls of the high priest came to him. When she saw Peter sitting by the fire warming himself, she earnestly looked at him and said, You were also with Jesus of Nazareth of Galilee. Then they said to him, Are you not also one of his disciples? And he denied him before all, saying, I am not. Woman, I do not know him, neither do I understand what you're saying. And he went outside into the forecourt to the gateway, and a rooster crowed. After a little while, the servant girl saw him again with another female, and began to say to those who stood by there, He is also one of those with Jesus of Nazareth. Again he denied it with an oath. Peter said, Man, I am not. I do not know the man. A little later, after about an hour had passed, those who stood by came and said again to Peter, Surely you are also one of them, for you are also from Galilee, and your speech is alike, making you manifest. Another confidently affirmed, saying, Truly this one was also with him, for he is from Galilee. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, Did I not see you in the garden with him? And then Peter denied again. He began to curse and to swear, saying, Man, I do not know this man of whom you speak or what you are saying. Immediately, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed a second time. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus the Lord, how he had said to him, Before a rooster crows twice, you shall deny me 3 times. And when he thought about it, Peter went out and wept bitterly. And the men who held Jesus mocked him and beat him. And when they had blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is it that struck you? And they blasphemously spoke many other things against him. Immediately in the morning, the elders of the people, all the chief priests and the Torah teachers, and the whole Sanhedrin council gathered together and led him into their Sanhedrin council. They held a consultation against Jesus so as to put him to death, saying, If you are the Messiah, tell us. But he said to them, If I tell you, you will by no means believe. And if I also ask you, you will by no means answer me or let me go. Hereafter the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God. They all said, Are you the Son of God then? He said to them, You say it, because I am. And they said, What further testimony do we need? For we ourselves have heard it from his own mouth. And the whole multitude of them arose. When they had bound Jesus, they led him away from Caiaphas and delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor, to the praetorium. Judah returns his money and hangs himself. Then Judah, who had delivered him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented, and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by delivering innocent blood. They said, What is that to us? You see to it. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple, departed, went away, and hung himself. The chief priests took the silver pieces and said, It is not Torah compliant to put them into the treasury, since it is the price of blood. And they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field for the burial of strangers. Therefore that field was called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him who was priced, whom they, of the sons of Israel, had priced, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Jesus before Pilate and Herod. It was early, and they themselves did not go into the praetorium, so that they might not be defiled, so that they might eat the Passover feast. Pilate then went out to them and said, What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. Then Pilate said to them, You take him and judge him according to your law. Then the Jews said to him, It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, so that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled which he spoke, by signifying what death he was about to die. And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this one perverting the nation, and forbidding to give taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Messiah, a king. Then Pilate entered into the praetorium again and called Jesus, and Jesus stood before the governor. And Pilate the governor asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, You say it. Do you say this thing from yourself, or did others say it to you concerning me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the high priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, then my servants would struggle, that I might not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Pilate then said to him, Are you a king then? Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I came to the world, that I may testify to the truth. Everyone who is from the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews, and Pilate said to the chief priests and the multitude, I find no fault in this man. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders of many things, he answered with nothing. Then Pilate asked him again, saying, Do you not answer? Do you not hear? Look, how many things they testify against you. And Jesus still did not answer him, not even a word. So that Pilate the governor marveled exceedingly. And they were more fierce, saying, He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. When Pilate heard about Galilee, he asked if the man was a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he was from Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem in those days. When Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he desired to see him for a long time, because he had heard many things concerning him, and he hoped to see some sign done by him. And he questioned him with many words, but he answered him by saying nothing. The chief priests and the Torah teachers stood and vehemently accused him. Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him, and put gorgeous raiment around him and sent him back to Pilate. And that day Pilate and Herod became friends with one another, for previously they were at enmity with each other. At every feast the governor was accustomed to release to the multitude one prisoner, whomever they wished. Then there was a notorious prisoner called Barabbas, a robber, bound with his fellow rebels for a certain sedition made in the city, who had committed murder in the insurrection. Therefore Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, they gathered together, and the multitude, crying out, began to ask for themselves according as he had always done. Pilate said to them, You brought this man to me, as one that turns the people away, and look, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. Neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him. And look, nothing worthy of death has been done by him. But you have a custom that I should release one to you at the Passover. Then whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Messiah, the King of the Jews? I will therefore chastise him and release him. for it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast, and he knew that the chief priests had delivered him because of envy. When he had sat down on the judgment seat, his wife sent for him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous one, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him." And the chief priests and the elders stirred up and persuaded the multitudes that they should ask that he would rather release Barabbas to them and destroy Jesus. The governor said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" Then the whole multitude cried out again, saying, "Not this one, but release to us Barabbas." Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called to them. And Pilate answered and said to them again, "What then do you want me to do with Jesus, whom you called Messiah, the King of the Jews?" And they all cried out again, saying to him, "Crucify, let him be crucified." And Pilate the governor said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go." And they pressed with loud voices. They cried out all the more exceedingly, asking that he be crucified, saying, "Let him be crucified." Pilate saw that it profited nothing, but rather an uproar was happening. He took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this righteous one. You shall see." And all the people answered and said, "His blood is on us and on our children." And the voices of those and of the chief priests prevailed. Then Pilate, wanting to gratify the multitude, decreed that it should be as they requested, and he released Barabbas, whom they requested, who for sedition and murder was cast into prison, to them. So then Pilate took Jesus, and when he had Jesus scourged, he delivered Jesus to their will to be crucified. And then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus and led him away into the courtyard, which is the praetorium. And they called and gathered together the whole band around him. They stripped him, clothed him with purple, and put a scarlet cloak on him. And the soldiers braided a crown of thorns, and they put it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. They kneeled before him, mocked him, and began to salute him, saying, "Hail the King of the Jews!" They struck him on the head with the reed, spat on him, and bending the knee, bowed before him, and they gave him slaps. Pilate then went out again and said to them, "Behold, I bring him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." Then Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple garment, and Pilate said to them, "Look, the man." Then when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "You take him and you crucify him, for I find no fault in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a Torah, and according to our Torah he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Then when Pilate heard that saying, he was even more afraid, and went into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "You are not speaking to me? Do you know that I have power to crucify you and have power to release you?" Jesus answered, "You would not have any power over me unless it was given to you from above. Because of this, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." And from then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." Then when Pilate heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabta. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Look, your king." But they cried out, "Away from him, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Therefore he then delivered him to be crucified. And when they had mocked him, they took the purple cloak off of him and put his own garments on him.